Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Friday the 13th. Probably my second favorite Friday the 13th ever, given the day's events. Probably my second favorite ever. My first favorite was the day my wife said, yeah, she would marry me. Boy, was that a dumb move. But yeah, Friday the 13th. The day I asked if she would marry me, and we got married the next day. It tells you how screwed up I am. But today, great day. Wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. Trump and the GOP have got to be losing their minds. Hopping mad, losing their minds. And Rod Rosenstein stole Trump's thunder. Every network preempted the T with the pinky up. And this was going to be Trump's moment. This was the moment with the Queen. This was, the pomp and circumstance, guys at the big hats and the bayonets. Everybody there for him. And nobody saw it. Because everybody got to see. And look, I tuned in with my daughter. I tuned in to, let's see if he makes a buffoon of himself. Let's see if he trips or, spills something on the Queen. I don't know. Let's see if he does something along those lines. And immediately, I'm watching CNN and it preempts. It goes, hey, breaking news. I'm going, oh, what could it be? It's Friday. Must be Mueller time. And, there are indictments coming. I'm going, oh, this is perfect. Do you think someone planned it? Do you think someone planned it perfectly to coincide with Trump's big adventure? His big day out? Do you think they planned it? Of course they did. Of course they did. And as they should. Because look, the country was watching. I was watching. My daughter and I were both watching. And she's like, what's with the big hats? What's with the bayonets? And then she goes, wouldn't it be funny if all of the guys with the bayonets chased Trump around the yard and poked him in the behind? And I said, yes, that would be quite humorous. But yeah, some indictments today. The fact that Rosenstein even overshadowed the baby Trump blimp, I think is fantastic. And here's the other part of this, and this is expected. As we speak, it's being reported that as we speak right now, Republicans are preparing articles of impeachment. They are preparing impeachment proceedings. No, not against Trump. Come on, wake up. They're all under the thumb. There's all dirt on them against Rosenstein. How dare he? How dare he? According to Politico, House Freedom Caucus leaders Mark Meadows, the Republican of North Carolina, and Jim Jordan, I didn't know he was dropping people's drawers. From Ohio, they're leading the effort, and I guess impeachment documents could be filed as early as Monday. How dare you preempt the president with the Queen? And what happened? Well, today, 12 Russian intelligence officers were indicted formally on charges of hacking the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, Hillary's presidential campaign, and the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. You know who they're not convicted of, who they're not being indicted of hacking into? You can say it. Hillary's emails. For all of the talk of Hillary and her emails, the Russians never got those. Kind of makes you think. Anyway, now what are we up to? 35 indictments? 5 guilty pleas? You remember that 100-year Benghazi investigation by Trey Gowdy that got nothing? Not even a single indictment? Not even someone who, maybe, misstapled a piece of paper. Nothing. It got nothing. Spent millions and millions of dollars, years of rhetoric and, years of, headlines for Fox News. But nothing in the way of indictments. No, nothing there. Nothing. Here we got 35 indictments, 5 guilty pleas, and they haven't even let out the information. We don't even know what they've got yet. But here they say these 12 clearly were involved in hacking the 2016 election. It is not a theory anymore. It is something that we know for fact and have known for a while. Look, the reality is we've known this for a very long time. And what we learned today, again, what we knew yesterday and months before, they hacked into voting rolls. They got the identities of us, and what the indictment says is it got. Well, I'll just read right from the indictment, line 72. In and around July 16, Kovalv and his co-conspirators hacked the website of a state board of elections and stole information relating to approximately 500,000 voters, including names, addresses, partial social security numbers, dates of birth, and driver's license numbers. So and the question I've got is, why did the Russians need all of that stuff? Also, they go into, and this is another part of the scary stuff here as well. Line 73, in and around August 2016, Kovalev and his co-conspirators hacked into the computers of a U.S. vendor that supplied software used to verify voter registration information for the 2016 U.S. elections. Kovalev and his co-conspirators used some of the same infrastructure to hack into vendor one that they used to hack into the vendor into the Board of Elections, the State Board of Elections. Now remember, Trump only won 3 states. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, by about 70,000 votes in the 3 states. Do you think, and I don't know exactly where these 500,000 voters information came from, but if you're if you're micro-targeting that few voters to swing, because understand, in this country, we're fairly polarized. And I've always said it's 5% of the electorate who decides every vote anyway. Every election is, and maybe this is the flaw of our democracy, but every election is swung by the 5% of the most low information voters possible. The people who, I'm not going to make up my mind until I get, till the day before. The people who have no idea any of the policies. It depends on, does he look nice? How do I feel that day? This is understand the flaw of our democracy. The most low information voters are the ones who swing elections, and they targeted those. And look, the Russians, they know us, and I've always taken the position that I don't think they were able to change the vote totals. I don't think they were able to hack into the machines. I will be surprised if that is true, if that happens. But they know us, and they know the fault lines. They know how to sway public opinion. They know who to target, how to target. They've been doing this stuff for years now. And the thing that gets me is we're surprised that we're adults and it worked on us. All of the idiots who are going, but the emails, and the Benghazi, and go down the list of the nothing burgers that were out there that the right had just constantly hammered on. And we now know that, the Russian military used those fault lines against us and constantly placed ads and constantly pushed people out. Look, we know there are still tons of trolls out there. Is it a 400-pound guy in New Jersey, or is it the Russian military with highly sophisticated bots? That's part of the question that I have going forward, not just for 2016, but for 2018, for 2020 and beyond. And the other part of this is what we also find out is that you've got a bunch of reporters in this country who, evidently took a bunch of stories from this Guccifer 2.0 and from DC Leaks. You have to wonder, did they know that they were being used as a tool for foreign military? Or were they just lazy? Or did they not even care? And the fact is, we've known for a while that Roger Stone was the guy who evidently, according to the indictment, there was a person who was in regular contact with senior members of the presidential campaign of Donald J. Trump. That's somebody, that person, that mystery person is Roger Stone. He's even admitted it. He said he was the guy. He admitted communicating with Julian Assange. No surprise there. And interestingly enough, this whole story really, kind of is exactly what's been reported hundreds of times over the last year and a half. It's Roger Stone. So why isn't he being indicted? And why aren't these reporters who just took what this guy was selling them and regurgitating it to their audiences. And why aren't the editors being held accountable? Why aren't these people being held accountable who wrote this stuff and went after Hillary? And look, I was not a huge Hillary fan, but the least of the problems I had was having a private email server. But the right wing, man, in a tizzy, losing their minds. She had a private email server. Yet Don Jr., Jared, you go down the list of Trump people who've got private email servers. Not a peep. Nothing. Zip. Zilch. And again, I go back to the interesting part. The Russian military was able to hack into the DNC, the DCCC, Podesta, Robbie Mook, got on the list of the people who clicked on the spear phishing link and were dumb enough to put their password in a solicited email. But beyond that, again, whose emails didn't get hacked? Hillary's. Now you get the same day that Donald Trump is calling for someone to get Hillary's emails. Oddly enough, the Russian military starts trying to hack into her emails. And this is not new. None of this stuff is new. What is new is it's now part of an indictment. It is now part of something that will be presented in a court of law and people will be held accountable. Now, what I do find interesting is that as I was watching Fox News, the coordination of message between the White House and Fox News was blatant. Absolutely blatant. Because as soon as this is how the day went. My daughter and I were sitting watching CNN, watching the pomp and the circumstance, and watching the Queen lead Trump around the little courtyard, and then it breaks, and you're going, oh hey, we're going to go to this Rod Rosenstein press conference. So I go over to Fox News because I want to see if they're showing gardening or something, and I was kind of stunned that there was Rosenstein and they were actually covering it live away from Trump. Pretty surprised. But as soon as it was over, as soon as the press conference was over, you had the gaggle of hens there who were then just spewing. There's no allegation of collusion. There's no collusion there. Donald Trump didn't. No, there's no collusion. No American committed a crime. That means Donald Trump's innocent. There's nothing here. And they were like hair on fire kind of stuff. And there's no allegation of a conspiracy in the vote count. The vote was Donald Trump won. And, you go, did you get those talking points right from the White House? Or did they just, when they were washing the brain and filling it with what they wanted, did they just permanently implant that? I got to think permanently implanted. But, I look at this as good. This is a good step. And hopefully next Friday, something will come out as well. And maybe the Friday after that and the Friday after that. Because when I heard indictments, I tweeted this out. Please let it be Jared. Please let it be Idiot Jr. Please let it be somebody who was front and center in this. Look, you're going after the Russian military. That's going to be kind of interesting. And it should make the meeting that Trump has with Putin fairly interesting. Personally, don't think he should have the meeting, given the fact that more information keeps coming out of what we already knew to solidify what we already knew. And you still have Trump saying, well, hey, we might cease joint military exercises in the Baltics if Putin asks. Yeah, hey, and why not just move out of Germany altogether? Why not just just pack up and leave all around Eastern Europe? Just get out. Let the Russians steamroll all of those countries, and not only give them Crimea, let them recognize that, but hey, let them take Ukraine. See how crazy this gets? And we've got a guy who clearly, in my view, clearly is compromised. So I come back to this viewpoint of the Supreme Court seat is the least of our problems right now. There should be no confirmation vote. This should be stopped immediately. Virtually anything this administration does from this point forward should be stopped immediately, because they're only going to do more damage, and they're only going to do more damage in trying to protect themselves, which means what are they going to sell off? What are they going to break? What are they going to screw up? What chaos are they going to cause? Do we start a war to cover this? How bad does it get before Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House wake up and say, you know what? This guy's compromised. We've got to do something to save not just our country, because if you don't care about the country, I get that. You're bought and paid for anyway. But at least save your own skin. With your radical self-interest ideology, that would at least play into this. Self-preservation should be one of those things that you Republican legislators should at least think about. Or, the other question is, are you that deeply indebted to the Koch brothers and the wealth class of this country who are really pushing towards a fascist state? I guess that's a question we will find an answer to very soon. And I got lots of questions. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about the latest executive order, get away from the Supreme Court a little bit, away from the baby blimp, which I got to be honest, I would love to have little tiny baby blimps. It would be great to have like remote control little baby blimps. Those would be great. But when we take a quick break, Max Richtman's going to be here, president of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. That was the day 2,500 pressmen, reporters, drivers, and clerks went out on strike against the Detroit News and the Free Press. Both newspapers had created a virtual monopoly in 1988 by merging their advertising and circulation departments into the Detroit Newspaper Association. Even as the DNA raked in record profits, they forced years of concessions, including wage freezes and layoffs. When the association implemented a merit pay raise system, the newspaper guild voted to strike. 5 other unions, including CWA and the Teamsters, soon followed. The newspapers, however, were ready. Just before the strike, they cut off the dues checkoff. They also contracted with the company Alternative Workforce to provide scabs. They also hired private security guards from Huffmaster and Vance International to enforce the scab herding. A solid union boycott cut revenues for both newspapers. On August 19th, hundreds of strikers stopped scabbing until police attacked the picket line, breaking arms and arresting at least 4. Then, on Labor Day weekend, thousands of strikers and supporters successfully repulsed police forces amassed from across the state to break up the picket lines. By mid-September, both newspapers were forced to airlift the Sunday edition until strike-breaking injunctions limited picket lines. Over 100 had been arrested over the course of several weeks. Unable to stop production, strikers gradually returned to work until the strike was finally called off in February of 1997. In his 2-volume set, Workers in America, Robert Weir notes that many labor activists criticized strike tactics. They argued direct action to stop production should have been the priority rather than boycotts and political pressure. Once the strike ended, the DNA claimed all but a few had forfeited their jobs. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So it looks like we're making patronage great again. A story over at the Washington Post reported today that the Trump administration, that Trump has an executive order, evidently, that's going to end the civil service hiring process for administrative law judges. Now, these are the people who, they do a lot of things, but mostly Social Security. They primarily work for the Social Security Administration. And they're the folks who decide whether, you get Social Security or you don't. And I got to tell you, this is big. This is big because you've got now Trump turning what was a boring bureaucratic department of, based on facts and people with qualifications into something that's purely ideological. So basically, if you're a 20-year-old staffer who worked on a campaign and you got coffee and you did that stuff, but you watched an episode of Judge Judy, bang, you're qualified. I mean, if it's not bad enough that he's packing the federal bench and the Supreme Court, now this. And I got to tell you, this is trouble ahead, and which is why right now is where we got to start pushing back, which is why I've asked Max Richtman to come talk with us. He's president of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Max, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for shining a spotlight on this. We've had so much attention paid on, and rightly so, Supreme Court nomination. This is under the radar. There are about 1,900 administrative law judges. About 85% deal with Social Security hearings, disability claims, and the rest deal with a whole variety of issues dealing with water safety, any agency issues that must be heard by administrative law judge. And now we're going to be clearly, with this executive order that was signed on Tuesday, it's an effort to politicize, and you put it very well, make patronage great again. I think that's what this is all about.
And it's also about loyalty. I mean, you come back to this idea, the whole idea of patronage is to hold your people accountable, and not accountable to we the people, but accountable to Trump. And to me, that's a scary thing, because when you start taking what should be a boring agency of people who are highly qualified and make rulings based on what's the law and what's in front of them, when you throw that out, you have a society of chaos.
That's absolutely correct. The basic thrust of this executive order is to transform administrative law judges from civil servants, who, by the way, have to go through rigorous examinations and education to qualify for these jobs. That they're going to be transformed from something that's competitive to essentially political appointees. And that should scare the heck out of everybody.
But here's the thing, and this is where, I come back to the ideology of the Republican Party is to destroy government. It's to tear things down. It's to destroy faith in institution. So when I look at this, I have to be completely upfront. This is very predictable, and what I would expect from the Republicans and from this administration.
The practice of having career civil servants make determinations based on merit has been in place since 1947, and it's worked pretty well. Now, with this executive order, we're going to see decisions made about whether someone qualifies for Social Security disability based on politics. And we know that this administration and this Republican-controlled Congress don't have the highest regards for these programs. They've been trying to cut them for quite a long time. And this is just another way that can be accomplished.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because, there's a couple of ways of looking at this. I think there's the one way that you have Republicans who, we need to kick these lazy people off of the rolls. So get them back to work. No Social Security for you, Granny. There's part of me that goes, they're just figuring out ways to make sure that people don't get the benefits that they're entitled to. And then there's the other part that goes, and the much more cynical part of me that goes, Exhibit A, Your Honor, voter registration card. They're registered Democrats. Nothing for them. So I know I shouldn't be that cynical, but I can't help but looking at this administration, feeling that that's the inevitable place we end up at the end of this road.
I don't blame you at all for being cynical. We've seen the track record of this administration, but this is really one of the more insidious efforts to attack Social Security and a lot of other programs. It's not over, though. It's my understanding that just today, Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia, Elijah Cummings of Maryland, John Larson of Connecticut, David Cicilline of Rhode Island, they have approach the House Rules Committee. They're going to try their level best to add an amendment to an appropriations bill next week that will prohibit any funds that to be used to implement this new executive order. Now, they're in the minority, and so just as this we're seeing with the Supreme Court, you kind of majority rules. But I think if enough people find out about this, I think that there could be enough pushback that this could be stopped. And it's our hope, and that's why I'm so happy to have a chance to talk to your listeners. People should call their congressmen and their senators and say, we want fair, objective, qualified administrative law judges making these determinations. We don't want someone appointed based on their political proclivity and their ideology to decide whether someone should be getting a disability claim approved or not.
Yeah. Or, the administrative law judges also do a lot of work with the NLRB. So, there was part of me that looked at this from a labor perspective. And maybe you can address this a little bit because, the fact that you have these judges who could quite possibly rule against an employer, and that we can't have that. We can't have an agency that's actually going to stick up for workers. It seems to me that could be part of this, or it's just, the absolute blind faith hatred in government as a whole, and the Trump believing solely in his ability to do everything all at once.
Well, it is, about 85% of these roughly 1,900 administrative law judges deal with Social Security issues. But many of them, hundreds of them, deal with labor issues, environmental issues, any program where there is an appeal from an action by a government agency. That would most likely be handled by an administrative law judge. So we're going to see the impact if this happens. And I'm going to be clear, this isn't going to happen. It's not going to be a complete overhaul.
Right.
Current administrative law judges will be retained unless they can be disciplined for some cause. But people who are brought on over time, as those people retire, would be covered under this new executive order. But it is a long term, and that's the way we've got to look at it. We've got to look at it in the long term, and what is this going to mean for labor issues, environmental issues, work safety issues? All of these things have some guidance currently through the administrative law system, and it's going to become overwhelmingly political. It should scare everybody.
It should, but here's the other part of this that frightens me, and the political part is one thing. As I was looking at the last series of executive orders attacking federal government workers and their unions and their ability to protect themselves, this administration wants to hire and fire people at will. They want at-will employment for everyone across the board. And I look at these administrative law judges and go, as you were just talking about, they're going to be able to retain their jobs unless they do something. And immediately my mind goes to, they've already set the groundwork where they can fire anybody they want. So conceivably, they could wipe out all of them and privatize the whole thing and end up with, the Supreme Court just ruled on the Epic Systems cases where, mandatory forced arbitration. We could end up having this stuff in private arbiter hands.
Yeah, well, that's the worst case scenario, and it is not totally unrealistic. I think you're right on. I think these for decades now, the administrative law judges have protected us against partisanship, cronyism. This executive order will end, over time, the long-standing use of substantive, competency-based criteria to select administrative law judges. And White House will be appointing judges who, I have no doubt, would be hostile to claims of discrimination, to resolve workplace discrimination cases, disability cases, and Social Security claims. So this could have a dramatic impact. And as I said, it doesn't have as much pizzazz as a Supreme Court appointment or the firing and hiring of an FBI director. But it is very insidious. It's going to have a long-term impact on our country, and we need to do everything we can to stop it. It can be stopped.
No, I'm right there with you.
And
this is where you
cry out.
Yeah, this is where every day you make your laundry list. You call your congressman. It's almost, for a lot of people that I talk to, it's like a daily ritual. They talk to their congresspeople more than they talk to their spouses. But here's the thing, and this is where I come back to this decision and where this could take us. Because I sit here, I'm 51. I sit here and go, I remember when I was younger, I could never have imagined that these kind of attacks would be happening on our institutions, on Social Security, on Medicare, on all of this. And I think back to having read a quote that Eisenhower wrote to his brother in a letter saying, anybody who would be against Social Security or labor laws or the Farm Bill, they'd never be heard from again in our political history. There are a couple of them, but their numbers are negligible and they're stupid. And somehow stupid is running our government.
Yeah, well, you really get down to the heart of it there. This new appointment process under this executive order will deny members of the public, I think, and I think that's where you're coming from, the due process and fair hearings that they deserve. And instead, they will be faced with an agency, administrative law judges, that is composed of insiders, political loyalists who have a job for which they may not even be qualified, but they feel indebted because they were hired because of their contact.
Yeah, I mean, look at that guy in Alabama. Trump was going to put a guy on a federal bench in Alabama who had never even stepped in a courtroom, never tried a case. He had a law degree, but had never actually been in a courtroom, had never actually tried a case, had absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. In fact, didn't even understand the process. And his name was thrown out as someone to sit on a federal bench with a lifetime appointment. So would it surprise anybody that they'd put a couple of political hacks into deciding if an injured person gets Social Security? Absolutely not. Last question I've got for you, Max, and this is kind of one of those personal things. You're a little bit older than I am. You've been around this game a long time. Did you ever imagine we would be in this place, this polarized, this divided, especially on something that used to unite us like Social Security?
Never. Absolutely not. Never. Even in the darkest days of under previous administrations, whether it was Bush or Clinton or Bush, the first President Bush or Obama. I mean, I don't know if you watched the hearing yesterday of the
I did.
FBI. I mean,
disgrace.
It was you remember during the Joe McCarthy hearings when finally someone said, "Have you no decency?"
I don't, but I watched it.
Yeah, this Congress, through the actions of this particular committee, cries out for some decency, and it's really not there. And we've got a big election coming up.
Yep.
A lot of this can be changed.
Throw the bums out.
With the right people in the right offices.
Good stuff. Max, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Good on you, and we're going to keep pushing this. And as this continues, we'd love to have you come back and tell us what's going on and how we can help.
Thank you for your passion.
Good stuff. Max Richtman, president of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. You can check out their website, ncpssm.org. We'll get a link out on Twitter. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1863. That was the day that draft riots broke out in New York City. The Civil War had been raging for 2 years. For the first time in United States history, the government instituted a draft lottery. But for those with enough money, they could buy their way out of the draft. For $300 or more than $5,000 in today's money, you could remove your name from the lottery. This meant that the city's working class men, many of them Irish Americans, had to fight while the wealthy could stay home. Anger in New York City mounted. The anger was stoked by anti-war newspapers and politicians. The newspapers railed against the war and the draft. They also riled up fears that more black Southerners would come to New York because of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Black men were exempted from the draft because they were not citizens. This further fueled anti-black anger amongst working-class whites. On the second day of the draft, violence erupted. First, the rioters targeted government facilities, but then they turned their wrath on black New Yorkers. White dock workers destroyed dance halls and boarding houses that served black patrons near the docks. A mob burnt down an orphanage for black children, but fortunately the children escaped. 11 black men were lynched. President Lincoln sent federal militia to New York to quell the uprising. After 4 days of violence, the official death toll rose above 100, but the true number is unknown. The Martin Scorsese film Gangs of New York dramatized the draft riots. To this day, class continues to be a major factor in who fights and dies on the battlefield. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The animals, trap, 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 till the cages fall. The cages fall, stay away in the dark. Count mistakes, the light was out.
Sanity for a change. The Rick Smith Show.
Day is new, and everyone is waiting on you. And you got time.
Yes, especially if you're Paul Manafort. You've got plenty of time. And look, and good on him. Going to use some of that time for self-enrichment. I do a little reading, get all that stuff done. Good for him. Needs it. Catch up on some old reading, on some old paperwork. Good stuff. One of my favorite Trump quotes this week was that he's very popular in the UK. And if you look at the crowds of people out there, welcoming him, okay. Popular is a word. Granted, all of the signs that you've seen, very creative, and not a lot of them that I can say on air. And look, I look at the Brits as someone who they use profanity and in very, very interesting ways. Often, often. And some of the signs I saw were quite interesting and quite amusing. There's a site that has a bunch of pictures up, and you can go through the profanity. But the latest poll that I saw said 77% of the British people disapprove of Trump. So I don't know that popular is the word that I would use. Maybe unpopular. But I saw the pictures from overhead of all of the people out protesting Trump, and immediately I couldn't help but think of, wow, that's a lot more people than showed up for his inauguration. Maybe they could have just used that picture and say, look at all the people who showed up. The biggest ever. And I guess he can claim that, the biggest ever protest to an American president on an allied soil. Congratulations. Good on you. I'm surprised they didn't burn the blimp in effigy. That's how crazy things have gotten. And now you've got John McCain, who from his deathbed is saying, you should probably cancel the meeting with Putin. In fact, he said today that President Trump must be willing to confront Putin from a position of strength and demonstrate that there will be a serious price to pay for his ongoing aggression toward the United States and democracies around the world. If President Trump is not prepared to hold Putin accountable, the summit in Helsinki should not move forward. McCain also said that there is a body of evidence confirming an extensive plot by Putin's government to influence the election and sow the seeds of chaos and dissent within America. He went on to say, despite repeated warnings from our nation's top intelligence and military leaders, the Kremlin's efforts to weaken our institutions have continued unabated with insufficient action taken by the administration or Congress to strengthen our cyber defenses, safeguard our election systems, and deter future destabilizing activities. No kidding. And this was the position I took on Inauguration Day. Look, you can say that, and this is the position I've always taken. Whether Trump colluded or not is a whole separate thing. I believe his campaign, and I've believed this from the very beginning, that the idiots under him, that Junior and Cush Baby and Manafort and Page and Papadopoulos and the other one, what's the other one? Bannon. They're all tied in with these unsavory characters. They're all connected to these. I'm trying to, without going all British on you, I'm trying to think of the right word that really brings out the how strongly I feel about this. I do believe they were all connected, and I do believe they were all looking for anything that they could get to go against Hillary Clinton. I believe that wholeheartedly, and I believe that Idiot Junior and Cush Baby would have sold their mothers for something that would make Hillary Clinton look bad. They were that blindly ambitious. They were that arrogant, and I believe they were that stupid that they would meet with a foreign agent, and they did in Trump Tower. And who does that? Have you never watched one of those bad 80s spy movies where you meet in a dark alley somewhere and you wear dark sunglasses and an overcoat and you slide envelopes back and forth to each other? Did you not see that? It's called plausible deniability. I never saw his face. No, of course not. We had the coats on with the scarves. They actually invited them to Trump Tower, and they were all there. And then they claimed, well, it was about something else. It was about, lunch order. We there wasn't enough vodka in our bottle. And you go, but, just from the pure appearance part of this, don't you get that it looks bad? And then you throw Manafort into this, who has had extensive relationships in that region for decades. Now, I've always said that maybe Trump didn't know. And even if he didn't know, or he did, to me, it's almost immaterial to the other important part, which we're still vulnerable. In denying anything happened, they've denied us the ability to fix what happened. Because, and it goes to the ego of Trump. We can't possibly admit as a society that something happened. That, how far you want to believe this goes. Was it just, some Facebook ads? Was it just social media? Was it actually, getting all of these people's names and targeting them with specific messages that you knew would sway them one way or another? Depending on your level of understanding and concern, how sophisticated was it? I don't know that matters. The fact that they were able to hack in and grab 500,000 names of people with their addresses and partial social security numbers and birth dates and party affiliations and all that stuff should scare everybody. The fact that they have the ability to do that and are currently still doing it should scare everybody. And the fact that we are so far behind the rest of reality. Understand how we do voting in this country. We leave it up to the states to decide whatever they want to do. You do whatever you're going to do. And then the states, most states, leave it up to the counties. So you go to some podunk counties, throughout, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, you go any state. And they don't have the resources for, the most, up-to-date technology. They bought that, that paperless voting machine, the black box. They bought that, 15 years ago. That's going to be good enough. And they've done nothing to secure it. All of this stuff is vulnerable. And we have no cohesive way of ensuring that the entire system is protected because we leave it up to, at least here in Pennsylvania, individual counties. The state has no real absolute say over all of them. They just basically collect from all of the 67 counties, which is, well, dumb. Then there's the other part of this, and it comes back to us. Like I said from the beginning, our elections are swung by, unfortunately, because we have such low voter participation. And maybe this is a good thing. I don't even actually know. There's part of me that goes, maybe we should get lower voter participation and get the ones who don't know what they're voting for, get them out. But I'm not quite there yet. But the most low information voters are the ones who swing this. And they're the people who are targeted. What I find amusing is, I get people all the time who go, Rick, nobody influenced my vote. I was never going to vote for that woman. And I go, well, maybe you weren't. Maybe you're, such strong of mind and such strong of moral fiber that you were going to make your own decision. This is the thing about Americans. It's really kind of funny. Even when we're being duped, we still think it's our idea. Because I've had these conversations with people and I go, well, how do you know what you know? Why do you believe what you believe? It's because, well, someone threw it in front of you. And then they reinforced it. And then they reinforced it. They got a bunch of people who you thought were just like you to reinforce it. So you would think you're having this little coffee clutch of low information voters, and you're getting your information. Turns out 4 of the 5 of you are Russian agents. They're just talking to you. You're just talking to yourself. And we've done nothing to fix any of this stuff. We've done absolutely nothing. Now, I know Facebook's trying to say they're doing some things, and I've always been a believer of maybe Facebook is too dangerous for us to have. And I've always said that I believe Twitter should be verified. Every person with a Twitter account should be verified. We should know who you are and that you actually exist. Because, it's always curious to me. It's always curious to me that, some of the most outrageous statements I get from people, some of the most ridiculous things that are said are by people who have like 2 Twitter followers, just started the account last month. They're following like 1,000 and they've got like 2 following them back. And, all of their things are just nonsensical and really with poor grammar. And look, I know we're not the most educated country in the world, but, a triple negative in every sentence, I don't know how you do that. But here again, this administration has harmed us in, multiple ways. But really, the fact that they've let this go on, has been one of the more egregious. Because, that old saying, live by the sword, die by the sword. What happens the day that, Putin has no more interest in Trump or the Republicans? And who knows, maybe the Democrats sell their soul. It's not out of the range of possibility. Hope it doesn't happen. This is why a thorough investigation needs to be had. We need to start locking people up. I want to see more perp walks. Loved today, the 12 indictments. Loved it. I am thrilled to see this. Good on them. Let's start locking them up. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. And in fact, I would love to see Carter Page go, Roger Stone go. There's a whole list of them that I would like to see locked up. Kushner, Bannon. Bring back some hits from the oldies. Let's find out what Reince Priebus knew. He's testified. I want to know what Hope Hicks knew. She's been interviewed. Spice Boy. Want to know what Spice Boy was involved in. Don McGahn, the counsel. Steve Miller. Go down the list of all of these Trump characters and what did they know? When did they know it? What did they do? And then, hey, I got an idea. Let's start locking them up. Just a thought. When we find out what they did, lock them up. Still waiting for Michael Flynn. I'm going to send him a postcard when he goes to jail. Quick break, right back.
I was excited when the kids are united. They can never be defined as yesterday. There's a brand new sham today.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
From Riga, Latvia, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. Fears of a U.S. withdrawal from NATO prompted an emergency alliance meeting on Thursday after President Trump demanded members hit a military spending goal of 2% of GDP by year's end, well ahead of a 2024 target date.
I told people that I'd be very unhappy if they didn't up their commitments very substantially.
French President Emmanuel Macron said Trump didn't formally warn of a U.S. pullout from NATO, but some officials apparently heard that threat between the lines.
I think he behaves, frankly speaking, in an unstable way.
Kalev Stoyachescu is a research fellow at Estonia's International Center for Defense and Security and says Trump's rhetoric makes predicting NATO's fate a challenge.
It's even hard to answer now. It's floating, I would say.
At least today, Trump's spending demands were clearer than his threats.
After we're at 2%, we'll start talking about going higher. I think 4% is the right number.
In the Baltic states bordering Russia, military spending is up and slated to keep increasing, a model Stoyachescu says more NATO states should follow. But for others like Germany, it could be a waste to throw vast sums at militaries not equipped to absorb it.
4% is something fantastic. Even the U.S. doesn't spend that.
A better option might be for NATO members to buy military equipment together, saving money and harmonizing assets in the process. But that's a distant concern here in Latvia, where the present fear is of a less involved United States.
We always believe in American leadership and hope that this American leadership will stay.
Yanis Garrisons is Latvia's state secretary, the most senior civilian in the country's armed forces.
We, of course, would like to live in the environment which is peaceful and nobody threatens us, but unfortunately we've seen different events in our eastern neighborhood, what Russia has been doing, and I somehow don't see that those things might change very quickly.
Luke Vargas, Riga, Latvia.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So Twitter's doing some major purging. They've gotten rid of millions of fake accounts, and look, it's about time. And it's interesting that Twitter's doing it on their own. Some big losers, though. I mean, everybody on my Twitter account, go, I lost 500, or I lost 1,000, or I lost a couple of thousand. Evidently, President Trump lost 204,000 Twitter followers. President Obama lost 2.4 million. He is the third most followed person on Twitter. And I guess this speaks volumes to where we are as a society. He's behind Katy Perry and Justin Bieber. Yeah. Anyway, but I'm just anyway, Katy Perry lost, I guess, 3 million of her 107 million followers. Bieber lost 2.7 million. LeBron James lost 880,000 followers. Bill Gates lost 900,000 followers. Oprah lost 1.4 million followers. And Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey lost 230,000 Twitter followers. Oh, not even his are all verified. And for me, again, I go back to this. Everyone should go through the verification process to know that you're actually a human person. And it would end, I think, by doing this, it would end a lot of the nonsensical trolling. Because I know people who set up fake accounts simply to be able to troll people who troll them. And I don't have time for that. I wish I was that smart. But I wish I had time for it. I just don't. But how much of that is that? And how much of it is, we think that there's this anonymity that we can say anything without repercussion. When I was a kid, and it goes a million years ago, if you said something stupid, someone smacked you. I'm not advocating violence, but you understood that there were things that you didn't say, and you were much more civil to each other. We've become really, really nasty. And is it the internet age, or is it the fact that people are really struggling? And, this is where we come back to the issues at hand. The Republican Party, they've done everything they could possibly think of to make working people's lives harder, to make making a living harder, to make, making ends meet that much more difficult, working longer and harder for less, not passing simple things like, a minimum wage increase. There's only been two presidents in the history of the minimum wage who haven't raised the minimum wage. One was Ronald Reagan, and the other was Barack Obama. And it's not because Obama didn't want to. It's because the Republicans, there was just no way it was ever going to happen. And I remember saying back in 2009, 2010, now is the time to really pursue all that stuff. When the Republicans were out of the majority, they were basically helpless, kind of like the Democrats are now. You could have pushed through some decent stuff to make people's lives better. You had the tragedy to do it. And for me, that was that moment. 2009 was the moment where you could have not let a good crisis go to waste. You could have pushed through, a better, minimum wage increase. You could have gone after some debt relief for students, for homeowners. You could have changed some of the worker comp stuff where you would, maybe not, incentivize people not to lose their jobs, just work less hours. We could have done a bunch of stuff. We could have passed a single payer. We could have done a bunch of things. But again, Democrats being who they are, didn't happen. In fact, again, you look at the conservative Democrats and you look at the Max Baucuses of the world who have really held up progress. And there's a problem. But it comes back to, and this is where, right now we're dealing with the Supreme Court situation where Joe Manchin is, he's already telling us that there's no way he's not voting for this guy. You look at all of his constituents who, because of Obama, because of a rabid right-wing echo chamber, because of a well-funded, well-built message machine, that you really have to be in awe of the level of commitment that conservatives have had in building this. Now West Virginia is a state that is rabidly red and, is extreme on every issue as they could be. And why is that? Well, I'm sure there's a bunch of reasons. One of them is it's one of the poorer states in the country, and they've been being robbed for generations. And two, it's that echo chamber that was constantly in their ear saying, Obama and the Democrats are screwing you. They're taking your coal. I remember when we went through there on our labor history tour, there were people literally with guns ready to take us out because they thought we were there to talk bad about their coal, even though the coal companies had laid them off and stole their pensions and were in the process of taking their health care. They're literally being screwed right before our very eyes, and those folks are still defending the coal industry. Literally mind-blowing to me. But when you're told that's all you've got, when you're told that, you have to protect this or from anybody who wants to come take it because it's it, this is what you get. And this is what's happened in West Virginia and in other places. Understand, Republicans are so much better at fear-mongering, so much better at scaring people, so much better at playing in the bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy, that safety and security level, trying to stay out of the cold and being eaten from, the dinosaurs that they believe roamed around with people. Scary stuff. And now we got one running the country. Just literally scary stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with Bill Scher. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
For more than a century, the New York Times has unabashedly bragged in a banner slogan that it publishes, quote, all the news that's fit to print. Really? Then why did it publish a June 25th front-page article that was neither news nor fit to print? It was a gut job attacking our revolution, the aggressively progressive grassroots political movement that sprang out of Senator Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential run. The Times scoffed that, quote, fewer than 50% of the more than 80 candidates OR has endorsed have won elections this year. Huh? Newsflash for clueless media cognoscenti. Winning anywhere near half of your campaigns is a stunning achievement. It's all the more stunning that it's being achieved by the feisty progressive rebels of our revolution. For nearly all of the candidates they endorse are unconventional, first-time contenders who start out with no name recognition, no fat cat money, and no support from establishment power brokers. I happen to be a board member of the upstart Our Revolution movement, so I know many of these gutsy mavericks personally, and I've seen their surprisingly successful campaigns from the ground level. They're winning because they're bringing political integrity and Bernie's big policy ideas to voters hungry for both, and because in less than 2 years, OR has organized hundreds of thousands of Democratic populists into more than 600 active political networks all across the country, including grassroots organizing in red areas the party has long ignored. This is Jim Hightower saying, asked about the Times mocking of the movement's win-loss record, Senator Sanders deadpanned, "It's not a baseball game." In fact, though, even the biggest of baseball superstars have never come close to a .500 batting average, nor will the Times ever hit 500 on its pledge to cover all the news fit to print.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Times like these you learn to live again. It's times like these you live again. It's times like
Not that it matters, but I reiterate my call that Judge Kavanaugh should not be confirmed. There shouldn't be hearings until all of the indictments and all of the questions around Trump's behavior are answered. And also, I mean, look, this is a guy who clearly has said, he doesn't think that a sitting president should be investigated. That's a problem for me. And also, I mean, outside of repealing the entire 20th century, that's also a problem. I just think now is not, given all of the stuff we know, now is not the right time. But will Democrats be able to muster the votes? Will they be able to keep their own? And will they be able to attract one of the Republicans? That is the question, which is why I asked our next guest, Bill Scher, to come talk with us. He's written the piece, Will Susan Collins Get Snookered Again? I believe yes. Bill, thanks for taking time for us.
Always a pleasure.
So I'm going to go with yes. I think she will. I don't think she's naive. I think she's just a follower.
Well, I mean, some people express their complaint to me, and I don't write the headlines, of course. But Susan Collins never got snookered in the first place. That she knows what she's doing. That she's a phony. She didn't get played by Mitch McConnell with the tax cut bill, trying to trade it for an Obamacare stabilization bill, which never happened. She knew that wasn't going to happen. She's just trying to pull it over on all of us. And look, I'm not going to get in her head and what really is making her tick. But in that piece, what I was saying was she is saying on the record that she wants to vote for a justice who is going to respect precedent, his so-called stare decisis in the parlance of the Supreme Court, which is necessary so the court doesn't become a political football that swings after every election. That there's consistency to its rulings and that the public can look to it as a fair arbiter of what is constitutional. So, and she says because that is her desire, you should worry about Roe v. Wade being overturned because any judge that I vote for didn't overturn or something like that if they did respect precedent.
Right.
So if that's what she believes, if that's what she really wants to do, she has the power to do that. Not just by voting no, because obviously you and I might want that, but that's a little too pat a suggestion to give to her. She could say now, I am not going to vote for any nomination that is not the result of bipartisan consultation in advance. So
right.
Put away your Federalist Society vetted list, which Collins herself has criticized, and say, join with me, Joe Manchin, Bob Casey, Don Tester, Heidi Camp. Let's get in a room together and come up with somebody who we all agree with. And if you can't do that, then you don't get a judge. she could do that. She has not done it yet, but she has the power to do that.
No, and this is what I said, from the beginning. I would love to see, those. If the moderates are good for anything, it would be making sure that nothing extreme happens. And you're right. I mean, if Manchin and Heitkamp and Donnelly and Murkowski and Collins and even Casey, throw him into that, all got together and said, you know what, we're not voting for an extreme judge, they would have enormous power. And I think they would have, going back to their home states, enormous power to go back, look and say, we've changed things for the better. I think that would be a great thing. It's not going to happen, but I think it'd be a great thing.
I don't think it's going to happen. So if Trump picked Amy Barrett, I think there was a chance that something like this might have happened. But with Kavanaugh, Collins has already sort of signaled her acquiescence. But these are folks that say time and time again, we're too divided, we're too polarized, there's a breakdown in civility, there's a breakdown of faith in institutions. Oh, woe is us. And if you actually has not just a vote in the Senate, but in Collins' case, arguably the vote, because it is a 50-49 Senate with McCain incapacitated in Arizona. You need 50 plus Mike Pence, there's a tie vote, to get something done in the Senate. Collins is a blue state Republican, one of only two blue state Republicans in the country, and someone who is avowedly pro-choice. She has the power to do this, and if she did it in concert with red state Democrats, they would jump at the chance, because they say all those same things about moderation and compromise and trying to reduce polarization in the country. They could do something about it, and if they don't do something about it, then you have to wonder what is it that they're talking about in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I look back, Trump had, the White House had said, and a number of groups had come out and said that this was the, this group of people that they were looking at, it was the most transparent process that in the history of the Supreme Court. And I'm going, really? I don't seem to remember much transparency. There was a list handed out and I picked somebody. And I think they already knew it was going to be Kavanaugh, because if you look at when they bought the domains of, confirm Kavanaugh, that was, back in February.
Right, and who knows exactly what went down with Anthony Kennedy, if there was an actual backroom deal or just some winks and nods. Who actually knows? But Kavanaugh shouldn't be that big a surprise. And for all the crazy things Donald Trump has done, he does not go crazy on judges. They're conservative, of course. They're very right. I'm not saying that you should be comfortable with them, but he doesn't go off script. He telegraphed from the beginning, I'm going to pick Federalist Society vetted judges. I'm going to pick judges who are going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and you can take that to the bank, and that keeps his base happy. He doesn't mess with that. He knows he needs those guys in his corner, and he stays to the script.
No, you're absolutely right. And this is one of those things where, most people don't even know who the hell the Federalist Society is, and let alone understand how much power they have over this president and, over past presidents.
Well, and just so folks know, they're a conservative group, and there's nothing illegal about having a conservative group. Nothing wrong with a group that wants to advocate for judges who think like they want to think. So no one's breaking a law here, but it's very unusual for a president to almost totally outsource the vetting process to an ideological group. Where Barack Obama, we talk about Merrick Garland all the time. Let's remember the backstory here. Merrick Garland was somebody who was advocated by Senator Orrin Hatch, the very conservative Republican from Utah. Yep. Obama knew that he was dealing with a Republican Senate. He didn't think it was wise to pick a hard left judge when you have to get it confirmed from the opposite party. And Garland was pushed by Hatch back in 2010. 5 days before the announcement, he was on a talk show and said, I think Obama's just going to pick someone to get his base excited for the election. If we really want to pick a moderate, pick Merrick Garland. I don't believe he's going to do that. 5 days later, Obama does do that. He doesn't outsource it to some left-wing group. He listens to Orrin Hatch. And Orrin Hatch responded by saying, that day, I'm not going to give Merrick Garland a hearing. Someone who's his friend, It's maddening, but that's what actually happened. So what Trump has done here, some people say, what Trump did is not unusual. It's very unusual to outsource your vetting to an outside group.
No, absolutely. I mean, but with friends like Hatch, who needs enemies? But as I remember, and look, I've had these conversations recently of people saying, back in the old days, if you had a president of a different party, there was a conversation that was had. Granted, as you pointed out with Hatch, it was via media, but there was someone who'd say, okay, these are some judges that we might be willing to push through. Maybe pick some of that, and there was some back and forth because you didn't want a hard ideological judge. I'm looking at Kavanaugh.
With Hatch. This happened with Bill Clinton and Orrin Hatch.
Right.
When Bill Clinton, when he had a judicial opening, he went to Mario Cuomo. Said, "Would you take this?" Brushed him off. And then Clinton said, "Well, maybe I'll go to my Interior Secretary, Bruce Babbitt." And even the environmentalists said, "We like Bruce Babbitt at Interior. Don't get rid of him." And the conservatives, about having a cabinet member go to the court. Clinton was kind of out of sorts. He calls Orrin Hatch. Who would you pick if it was up to you? And Hatch said, she wouldn't be my first choice if I was the president, but as far as people who I think you might pick, I would recommend Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She is not a doctrinaire leftist. She actually disagrees with the reasoning of Roe v. Wade, even though she agreed with the results, and she'd argue for it in a different way. And she's actually been fairly independent and moderate when it comes to law enforcement, so I recommend you pick her. That's why she's there. So it's not like this hasn't happened before. It absolutely has happened before. But we've had this breakdown in the Republican Party where they refuse to talk in a consensus fashion anymore.
Yeah, and now we're going to get a guy who, look, throughout my life, I've never, outside of Bork, Robert Bork, I don't remember there being really a justice where you go, this is the end of civilization as we know it. I'm looking at Kavanaugh going, this is the guy who could really lead a judicial activist court that would repeal the 20th century.
I mean, you look at what he's done so far, it's not heartening. I would not be sanguine about what comes next. I would say, just so you don't feel like you have to jump off a ledge today, there has been value throughout the course of history to have the Supreme Court be removed from the political hurly-burly. The lifetime appointment is designed so they don't get politically pressured by voters, by Congress, by donors, or what have you. And that's why Joe Roberts, someone who's really conservative, and I disagree with almost everything that he does, he's upheld Obamacare. He did not have to answer to somebody when that case came to his desk, and he reasoned it in a way that he felt was the right thing to do. So without Kennedy there, Kennedy's been primarily the lone swing justice for the last several years. Does the group dynamic of the court change where somebody else, be it Roberts, be it Kavanaugh, or those both the two likely possibilities, most likely Roberts, does someone say, you know what, no one else is going to swing here. The court's reputation is on the line. The credibility in the eyes of the public is on the line. I can't turn this into a right-wing weapon and expect the public to be okay with it. Someone's got to make an adjustment here. That still is a possibility thanks to the way that the body is constructed.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But, my fear is that, I look at Kavanaugh, someone who I believe, probably from 6th or 7th grade has been groomed to be in this position, going through Georgetown Prep and Yale and Yale Law and then getting into, in with Starr and with the Bush administration and just being coddled by, Federalist Society types all the way through that there's no swinging on this guy.
Well, I think that's a very legitimate concern. The ideological vetting of judges is much more intense than what it was 20 years ago. Kavanaugh, in particular, has been a very partisan Republican for much of his life, and there's even been some analysis of his judicial rulings. He's been on the court for a fair amount of time, and it has been assessed that his rulings have been particularly partisan, more partisan than the average judge. So he has not been all that inclined to swing as it stands. But again, once you get there, once you're actually in that body and you don't have to answer to anybody anymore, you don't totally know what somebody is going to do. I mean, if I would put money on it,
yeah, I'll be honest.
At the end of the day, you never can know for total sure.
Yeah, I'm not really all that willing to want to go there. I know that to be the case, but I'm struggling with that. He's suddenly going to have an epiphany and turn. So let me ask you a last line of questioning, because there are a lot of people who are hoping, praying that maybe there's a dead hooker or some live boys in his past. Any chance of holding this up? Especially given, the key for me is this position that he has, that a president shouldn't be investigated or indicted or anything while sitting as the president. I struggle with that given our current situation.
Well, that's why you often delay. You delay for as long as you can because you don't know what's going to come up. And there's a lot of documents to sift through because you worked in the White House and the Bush administration. There's a lot of things to look at, and you never know. Now, if you bust the guy on a personal scandal, you're not defeating him on ideological grounds. Well, probably the next guy is going to be just ideological, and what have you actually accomplished? Probably not very much. Now, in the case of Bork was defeated on his philosophy. The second guy, Douglas Ginsburg, got busted on a personal scandal because he smoked marijuana, and then Reagan relented and said, "Oh, here's Anthony Kennedy. I know it's not quite as conservative as Bork, but I got to get this done now." So you can play for time. Sometimes things can break your way. But if we can't get a Republican to break ranks, you can't get a Collins or a Murkowski, who are your most likely options. There's some thought of Rand Paul's not going to like Kavanaugh because his views on executive power, but Paul's has tended to fall in line despite his idiosyncrasies. Then it becomes a tough question for what do the red state Democrats do? Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, John Tester, Claire McCaskill, these folks are up for re-election. They're in Trump states. There's going to be a lot of Democratic pressure to stay in line, but these guys might say he's already going to get confirmed. The Republicans haven't broken ranks. So my vote's not determinative. I might as well give him the extra vote so I can say to my state, I'm an independent person, not a knee-jerk partisan.
Yeah.
And that's going to really stick in Democrats' craw. But you got to think now, if you want to stop more Trump judges, you want to win back the Senate. If you win back the Senate, then if Thomas retires or Ginsburg and Breyer are their hand is forced, you can deny Trump another judge. So you don't want to take whatever anger you might have, you don't want to take it out on fellow Democrats who want any chance of stopping this judicial Trump train.
Yep, this is exactly what I said in 2016. You may not like Hillary, but it's the Supreme Court, stupid, and this is exactly where we are. Bill, I appreciate the time. Great article, good insight. Thanks so much. Always great talking with you.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Bill Scher. Make sure you check out Bill's article over at Politico Magazine. Will Susan Collins get snookered again? And as I said, I believe she will. And like he said, it's not snookered. I believe she's going to go there anyway. Just amazing. Quick break. Right back.
Could be the death of you and me, but we're not unarmed. Our weapon solidarity. Jim Beals and Karen Silkwood. The list goes on and on. With every year that passes, 60,000 more gone. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. And it's time we started calling the shots.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. That was the day 2,500 pressmen, reporters, drivers, and clerks went out on strike against the Detroit News and the Free Press. Both newspapers had created a virtual monopoly in 1988 by merging their advertising and circulation departments into the Detroit Newspaper Association. Even as the DNA raked in record profits, they forced years of concessions, including wage freezes and layoffs. When the association implemented a merit pay raise system, the newspaper guild voted to strike. 5 other unions, including CWA and the Teamsters, soon followed. The newspapers, however, were ready. Just before the strike, they cut off the dues checkoff. They also contracted with the company Alternative Workforce to provide scabs. They also hired private security guards from Huffmaster and Vance International to enforce the scab herding. A solid union boycott cut revenues for both newspapers. On August 19th, hundreds of strikers stopped scabbing until police attacked the picket lines, breaking arms, and arresting at least 4. Then, on Labor Day weekend, thousands of strikers and supporters successfully repulsed police forces amassed from across the state to break up the picket lines. By mid-September, both newspapers were forced to airlift the Sunday edition until strike-breaking injunctions limited picket lines. Over 100 had been arrested over the course of several weeks. Unable to stop production, strikers gradually returned to work until the strike was finally called off in February of 1997. In his 2-volume set, Workers in America, Robert Weir notes that many labor activists criticized strike tactics. They argued direct action to stop production should have been the priority rather than boycotts and political pressure. Once the strike ended, the DNA claimed all but a few had forfeited their jobs. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So we got through that. Not a big Susan Collins fan. Have never been a Susan Collins fan. Playing this middle ground thing, never been my cup of tea. Because look, it's always been a ruse. When she said, I'm going to vote for somebody who believes in precedent, and Gorsuch, really? I know he wrote the book on precedent and then threw it out the window in the Janus decision. Just crazy. Interesting story. Mike Pence. You ever heard the Pence story, the backstory? How his father built an empire in the gas station business. And Pence loved to say that, he was on the front row of the American dream. Evidently, story broke today that Indiana has spent something like $21 million cleaning up the American dream that Mike Pence got to live. As his father built this Keel Brothers oil company, this big, this oil gas station empire, I guess is how they're claiming it. As 200 gas stations, I guess they had across Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. And now they went belly up in 2004, and it was I guess a big to do. And now you've got all this land that's polluted, and you've got all of these sites that have tons of cancer-causing agents in the water. You've got all of this, these gas stations that have the tanks in the ground that have been leaking for years, and all of that. In fact, I guess, as they're saying now, there's still 85 sites in Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois that still need to be cleaned up. And who's it fall back on? Well, it falls back on we, the taxpayers. It falls back on the rest of us. And this has always been my problem with the deregulation people. This has always been my problem with, we need to let business police itself. You've heard that a bunch of times. The business, let them, we don't need those regulators, those bureaucrats. We don't need those people, doing it. Business will police itself because they don't want to get sued, they claim. I look at this story of which, the Pence family made out wildly well. The company went bust, sure, but they're still fine. Thank you very much. How many people suffered? How many people got cancer? How many? Because, they just went belly up. Leave it. And then we have to clean up the mess. This is what happens across business. Not just them. I mean, they're just a small potato in this. But across every state, you have these big companies who pull this stuff, and they make profit, wildly, and they have politicians who deregulate and skirt the law. And just the other day we were talking about in Kentucky, you got this coal mine where the 8 supervisors and people in charge there were just indicted on fraud charges because they changed the air quality reports to say no, the air quality is fine, it's perfectly breathable. And yet the reality is no, it wasn't. And there was nobody to protect those workers. There wasn't a cop on the beat to say, hey, this is wrong. Because, hey, they didn't have a union. There's another part of that. Okay, now we're indicting them years after the fact. But how many people are going to die because of it? And my frustration has always been, and I can never get a conservative to own up to it, is that, look, I'm not anti-business. I think people should have the right to own and operate businesses. I think it's good for the country, and it creates jobs and economic activity and all of that stuff. But there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do it. If you're in a business where you're making a sizable profit off of externalities, pushing something onto the taxpayer or onto society as a whole that you're not paying for, I have a problem with that. That kind of low road business is a problem. And a lot of it happens, with the air pollution, water pollution, the land pollution, they don't take care of what they're supposed to take care of. And who ends up covering it? Well, either the taxpayer or the neighbors who get cancer, or the workers who end up getting sick because of it and dying early because of occupational illnesses. This is my problem with the whole deregulation mantra. And look, I understand. I get the fact that sometimes regulations can be difficult to work around. I get that. But it's always been my question of when there is a regulation, you go, why did they put it into place in the first place? How did it get there? Why was it there? Instead of saying, no, we're going to go with our red pen and we're slashing. The sad reality is we're going to relive the same reasons that we got there. And I look at this Pence thing. You're talking, millions. It's just millions of dollars. It's just millions of dollars. I mean, we're not talking billions. I mean, this is small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, honestly. But it's still millions of dollars that is not going to be spent on education. It's not going to be spent on infrastructure. It's not going to be spent in a positive way. It's spent cleaning up someone else's mess who made a ton of money off of creating that mess. That's my real struggle. And, the more I look at this, the more you go, what we need is a regulatory body, a regulatory agency, a regulatory mindset that says, we're not going to allow this stuff to happen in the first place. And when it does, we remediate then. Before this company went out of business, before they sold off their assets and paid off their shareholders and paid off their CEOs and paid off Mike Pence and all of that, there should have been money set aside to make sure that the cleanup was done and that taxpayers weren't on the hook for their bankruptcy. But again, we're in the Donald Trump presidency era where, hey, that's the model. Welcome to corporate America. And who gets saddled with it? You and me. We get screwed with this stuff. And I'm tired of it. Tired. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Chelsea Acosta. She's a Utah middle school teacher, also one of the NAA Hispanic Caucus members. Going to share a little thoughts on their most recent convention and where we should be going on the education front. Quick break, right back.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
The Supreme Court could not only tell the EPA it no longer has to regulate carbon, but actually say the EPA doesn't have authority to regulate carbon.
Environmental groups mobilize against Trump's anti-regulation nominee to the Supreme Court. New report finds Trump's proposed coal bailout means more pollution and more death. Plus,
so electric mobility has to happen fast.
Shell CEO calls on UK to speed up transition to electric vehicles.
All of that electrifying news and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
But now Scott Pruitt will be succeeded by Andrew Wheeler, a former coal and chemical lobbyist who was the vice president of a group called the Washington Coal Club, which is kind of like the Secretary of Health being a member of the Beltway Gonorrhea Society.
True, though gonorrhea is less deadly than coal. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, a lot of folks have reason to be very concerned about Donald Trump's new nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court. And environmentalists, I would think, top the list given the damage this guy could do to the entire planet.
Yes. Major environmental groups say they are now mobilizing a public pressure campaign to oppose the confirmation of Donald Trump's pick of D.C. Court of Appeals Judge Brett Kavanaugh for a lifetime appointment on the U.S. Supreme Court to replace retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. Citing Kavanaugh's track record of ruling for industry and against federal pollution regulations, the Sierra Club, in a statement, called Kavanaugh, quote, an extreme ideologue who has time and again proven himself hostile to common sense environmental safeguards. Kavanaugh's views put the demands of polluters and big corporations before the rights of people. Retiring Justice Kennedy was occasionally a swing vote for public health and the environment, but with Kavanaugh, the court's right-wing majority could achieve long-sought overhauls of established public health protections like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. On a recent broadcast, Slate legal journalist Mark Joseph Stern noted that a number of significant Obama-era climate policy and pollution lawsuits are on their way to the court, which could rule to cripple the federal government's ability to curb the greenhouse gases that cause dangerous global warming.
There is a very, very strong chance that with Justice Kavanaugh's vote in the near future, the Supreme Court could not only tell the EPA it no longer has to regulate carbon, but actually say the EPA doesn't have authority to regulate carbon. This is what Justice Samuel Alito said in a speech a few years back, and I don't think the conservatives have given up this fight.
Now, scientists warn that the window of opportunity is closing to cut emissions and stave off the worst climate consequences that will impact all generations on the planet. So if he is seated, his impact will be very long-lasting.
And potentially very deadly.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration Department of Energy's proposal to force taxpayers to bail out unprofitable coal and nuclear power plants could actually lead to more deaths from pollution. That's according to a new analysis from nonprofit independent research group Resources for the Future, which estimates that for every 4 coal jobs that would be protected by the Trump administration's coal plant bailout, 1 American will die a premature death from increased toxic air pollution. And they say that's a conservative estimate.
And I think it needs to be underscored. You call it a coal industry bailout. It really is a coal industry bailout.
Yes, forcing Americans to keep these plants open even though there are more clean and cheaper energy sources available. But some good news, in North Carolina, Duke Energy is now harnessing poo power from the state's huge hog industry, capturing methane from massive hog manure waste lagoons to generate electricity with plans to expand. In New York City, National Grid PLC has opened a pilot plant to burn methane from human wastewater and sewage treatment plants to generate electricity.
What does it say when the only good news stories we can come up with have to do with pig poo and human poo?
Well, there you go.
That's where we are.
Finally, the CEO of oil giant Royal Dutch Shell, Ben van Beurden, has asked the UK government to move up its 2040 target date to ban gasoline-powered cars and to accelerate its transition to electric vehicles. He says doing so more quickly would change consumer attitudes and, quote, make it easier for Shell to make investment decisions going forward. Last October, Shell purchased a UK electric vehicle charging company, and earlier this month, BP bought the UK's biggest EV charging network.
So, to correct my earlier statement, for good news, we not only have to turn to pig poo and human poo, but we also have to laud the CEO of a major oil company.
That's where we are.
What has this world come to? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your poo-filled Green News Report.
Take a load off Fanny. Take a load for free. Take a load off Fanny.
Yes, it is all about the children, even after they're born. Rick Smith.
So the National Education Association, I guess just the beginning of the month, wrapped up their big expo. And these are interesting times for public education advocates and teachers especially, because you got the Janus decision, you've got the militancy in states like Arizona and Kentucky and Oklahoma. You've got all of this energy. And I looked at this, this expo, this big convention that they had. 10,000 people from across the country showed up in Minnesota to talk about the future of education and talk about, how you fight back against all of the attacks and just all of the overwhelming attacks coming from the moneyed interests. And, it's one of the things that we like to focus on. That's why I've asked Chelsea Acosta to come talk with us. She's a Utah middle school teacher, also a member of the Hispanic Caucus for the NEA. Chelsea, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So did you get to go to the big event?
I sure did. It is an incredible event for any educator. Absolutely. I'm recovering from it because it is quite the event.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the videos and some of the pictures, and I'm going, wow, this is this is a pretty remarkable event. And I can't imagine the networking and the connections and all of the stuff that you were able to achieve while there.
Well, I think what's so phenomenal, I'm a light-skinned Latina, so I call myself a Chicana with an X, and I live in a very conservative, very white state of Utah. So for me to be able to be a part of 7,000 to 10,000 teachers is just powerful. And so many of those teachers of color, I actually arrived about 4 days early to the conference, and it was our ethnic minority affairs meeting one day and our social justice and racial justice conference. And so it's so renewing and healing to be in such a powerful space with teachers of color talking about students of color issues that are happening right now.
Now, I did find it interesting as I was reading some of the reports that came out that, while the attacks on teachers have been hammered through and a lot of the commentary is, will the public sector unions, will they recoil from social justice issues? Will they recoil, from things that, the mainstream may find extreme? And I saw some of the things that came out. I'm going, nope, guess not.
Well, I know. And I think that, the U.S. is notorious. Historically, those are the first programs that get cut. And so our Human and Civil Rights Department, we are very weary because the social issues are near and dear to our hearts. And that typically is absolutely one of the first bits of funding that are cut, the ethnic minority affairs programs. I think one really neat thing that happened when we were in Minneapolis, the day the Janus decision rolled out, we were able to go, we quickly organized. The teachers there in Minneapolis were amazing. They organized with other blue-collar unions, and it was really powerful. So we did like a 12-day meeting, which is what most of the 10 days are. And then after we hit the street, and we were with other blue-collar unions, and we marched the street. And it was so incredibly powerful to be with the people, for the people, all about the people. And I think this administration really is not thinking about the power of what they're doing. They're trying to conquer and divide, but what they're really doing is they're bringing solidarity among the faith. And that's what we felt that day in Minneapolis.
Yeah, one person reminded me that New York, one of the amicus brief that New York had filed in the Janus case was along the lines of, don't do this because if the moderating members of the union leave, the people who, they don't care one way or another. If they leave, they're the moderating force. There'll be more strikes. There'll be more, the people who will be left in the union will be much more militant and much more willing to take to the streets and to strike and to, I don't know, deal with other unions and maybe start doing some sympathy strikes and start really bringing us back to a society of caring about each other under the mantra of an injury to one being an injury to all.
Absolutely. And I think one of the mantras that we've hit all year long, whatever you're taken to the streets for, whether it's for Black Lives Matter, immigration, the Janus decision, trying to undo union, is the mantra, whose streets, our streets. And that has just been, in all the marches I've been involved with this last year, from Sacramento all the way to Chicago to Boston to just across the board, is that these are our streets. And when you go after the common people, and you go after the teachers, and you go after the blue-collar workers that work, and we work so hard and get paid so very little, and we do it because, as far as teachers go, because that's what we love to do, and it's all about the students in our communities. But if you hit us hard and you hit us low enough, we have nothing to lose. And taking to the streets with our brothers and sisters that are working just as hard in other occupations, boy, let me tell you what, there's nothing more moving than seeing a group of us walking the streets in solidarity.
Yeah, and knowing that you're not alone. And that's, to me, that's the important part of all of these marches and all of this organizing going on. It's taking that anger and directing it in a positive direction. Let me ask you, before Trump was elected or won the Electoral College, were you one of the people marching in the street? I mean, were you an activist? Were you part of, or is this something you've come to?
No, I've been an activist for quite some time. So at 43, I came into kind of what they call critical consciousness a long time ago, going back and getting my master's degree in social justice and education. And again, being a light-skinned Chicana in Utah, it took me going back to school to realize that all the feelings and emotions I've had all these years were not my fault. And that, in fact, it definitely was the system. I marched the streets on social justice issues, but I now find myself like the Janus and other spaces in which we need to march together. And it really is about bringing the common people together and fight the system.
Yeah, so let me ask you, as someone who's evidently, as you pointed out, someone who's been in this quite some time, how do you bring people along who may not see that there's anything wrong? I talk to a lot of people, especially when you're talking about social justice. They think everything's fine. Everybody's equal. Everybody's, they don't see the bias. They don't see the discrimination. How do you reach to them?
Right, absolutely. It's funny. My mom's been teaching for 45 years, and she was running me to Verizon today. We were having that conversation. Yesterday, I was with a group of people that 8 of us were arrested, not myself. There was a point where I had to just choose my licensure over being arrested. But my mom was saying, Chelsea, there's just sometimes people go too far extreme. And I said, Mom, you have to have people across the board. You have to have the outliers on both ends for everyone to understand. And it people understand different avenues and people understand different issues at different times. And so you have to have it across the board. And I think that that really is where we're at right now. And I feel like, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we talk about immigration, and we talk about civil rights, we thought that with Obama we were post-racial, right? It was back in the colorblind era, I don't see color.
To be clear, I never believed that.
Yeah, me neither. I just want to say, me neither. Absolutely. But many people believed, oh, well, now we have a Black president, we're golden. And a lot of us were taught, I don't know your age, but a lot of us were taught not to see color. Sounds so different. That is so privileged. If we don't see color, we don't see.
Yeah, I go back to when Obama was elected, overwhelmingly elected, and I said, this is fantastic, but I'm not buying the post-racial thing. In fact, at the time, I remember saying there's going to be a backlash.
That's it, right? It's like, oh, wait for the backlash.
And we've seen this. I mean, this is why we've lost, Democrats have lost 1,000 seats in state houses across the country because the Republicans have really been able to stoke that racist anger. And this mantra that, somehow minorities get things that white people don't get is kind of ridiculous, but it's kind of already in our lexicon. It's in our language.
Well, and I think that's something that's really important that we discussed at the RA. The number one piece of that we chewed on at the RA, 10,000 teachers, 7,000 teachers, I'm not sure the exact numbers, but the main resolution we discussed was bringing to light white supremacy and white privilege. And the fact that not only were we going to work on it, discuss it, talk about it, but we were also going to create curriculum so that our students also understand it. And the dialogues in each state delegation were pretty intense. It was intense on my own. But at the end of the day, we passed it hands down as a teachers union, the largest union in the nation. We passed it that, look, white supremacy is what it is, and white privilege is what it is. It's there. And I think that what's happened with 45 coming into office, not my president, but 45 came into office, and we've had this whole underground festering wound of racism. And it has bred this deep infection. And we thought that we had it covered, and in fact, what we had was just this wound ready for someone to open it up and let it fester.
Right.
And 45, that's what's happened. We've ripped open the wound. My only thing that I have this discussion with my students, they're very 90% students of color, undocumented students. I have a lot of Black refugee students, and all I say to them is, guys, in order for a wound to heal, we have to rip it open. We have to push on it. We got to get some of that infection out, and we have to talk about it, and we have to figure out how are we going to heal this wound. Unfortunately, it is on the lives of the Black lives that we have lost. It is on the lives of our undocumented families that are being separated at the border and children being held in internment camp. It's trans lives. And so always keeping that privilege in check and knowing that I believe, and I have to believe, I think, and I have to tell my students that we are moving towards a better nation, and I use nation with quotes. We are moving towards a better place, but it's on the lives of people.
So how do we get to this place? I mean, we've been talking about this for a couple of generations now, that, we're going to get to this place where people are judged on their ability and their character. How do you get to this place? Because, I've had these conversations with educators who say, the system's biased towards white people, and, the tests are all biased. And I look, I want to be on the right side of history. I want to understand where the direction is. Are we talking about, completely separating as a society, going back to kind of a separate but equal, having, this is how we're going to treat Black kids, and this is how we're going to treat Hispanic kids, or this is how we're going to treat white kids? How do we make this mesh in what used to be, when I was a kid, was a melting pot? I guess we're not doing the melting pot anymore. What do we do?
I definitely think it needs to be community driven. You see the movement of Black Lives Matter. You see the movement by our immigration families of keeping families together, united we dream. There's a large LGBTQ movement for, we got marriage equality, but now we got to pull up our trans lives. The Native American community, we see them, and we're trying to stand up for them and native lands and women that are going missing. And so I think, A, it has to be community driven. B, we need some badass white allies that, A, understand it, can keep their own privilege in check, but then are willing to stand up and make a stance. We really need our white allies standing on the side. And then we've got to teach our kids. It has to. And that's where I tell educators, we really have to get in there and keep it real. And I believe that with time and us having these critical conversations, shows like yours, where people are listening, and even if they don't want to hear, they have to listen. And so the conquer and divide, and then we need people that are working on Janus. We need people that are talking about money and privatization and corporatization. We need people like yesterday, these amazing 8 friends of mine that were willing to block a door to MCC management and training corporations that build these detention centers and prison centers and profit off of the back of our marginalized communities. We need people that are willing to lay down and say enough is enough. And I think if we get enough recruits across the board in every one of those spaces, I think we have a chance. And maybe that's what I have to tell myself. But I feel good. I feel good knowing what people are doing on the ground.
It's good stuff. And look, at the end of the day, I've always been a believer in the concept of an injury to one is an injury to all. And as long as we're divided, as long as the wealth class of this country is able to pit us against one another, we collectively cannot move forward. So in that vein, that's the outreach I make to people who don't think there's a problem. I'm saying, look, if you've got a couple of groups who say there are problems, we need to bring them along, and we all need to be moving forward together and stop the division and stop being sliced and diced and pitted against each other.
Well, and I think with age, but I also think with the stress of 45 and with technology, I think we've all gotten really good, me included, of dehumanizing everything and standing behind our screens, numbing ourselves, detaching ourselves. And it's no more, because it's the more we detach, the more we're numb, the more we stand behind our screens, the less we can just see suffering in another human being. At the end of the day, it's another human and another human.
So last question I've got for you. What advice do you give to people? What actions do you think people who want to be helpful, what actions do they take?
Just do something. And I think there's this desperation to do something. And I don't want to knock people just hitting repost on Facebook, because that's something. But I need you to get out in your communities for our kids, for our community, for our future. Pick whatever is your deal, whatever floats your boat. If it's Black Lives Matter, immigration, LGBTQ, if it's privatization and corporatization of our tests, if it's anti-prison systems, if it's against the MTC, whatever it is, pick something, run for office, and do it with vigor, and do it with desperation, and think about the marginalized communities that are invisible, that are silenced, that can't do it, and would do it if they could.
There you go. Or steal the line from that televangelist from the 90s. I think Robert Schuller was his name. Don't just sit there, do something.
Wonderful. Yes, please, do something.
There you go. Chelsea, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Rick. Okay.
Good stuff. Chelsea Acosta. She's right. Just don't sit there. Do something. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1863. That was the day that draft riots broke out in New York City. The Civil War had been raging for 2 years. For the first time in United States history, the government instituted a draft lottery. But for those with enough money, they could buy their way out of the draft. For $300 or more than $5,000 in today's money, you could remove your name from the lottery. This meant that the city's working class men, many of them Irish Americans, had to fight while the wealthy could stay home. Anger in New York City mounted. The anger was stoked by anti-war newspapers and politicians. The newspapers railed against the war and the draft. They also riled up fears that more black Southerners would come to New York because of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Black men were exempted from the draft because they were not citizens. This further fueled anti-black anger amongst working-class whites. On the second day of the draft, violence erupted. First, the rioters targeted government facilities, but then they turned their wrath on black New Yorkers. White dock workers destroyed dance halls and boarding houses that served black patrons near the docks. A mob burnt down an orphanage for black children, but fortunately the children escaped. 11 black men were lynched. President Lincoln sent federal militia to New York to quell the uprising. After 4 days of violence, the official death toll rose above 100, but the true number is unknown. The Martin Scorsese film Gangs of New York dramatized the draft riots. To this day, class continues to be a major factor in who fights and dies on the battlefield. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war is one you found to me.
So Representative Joe Kennedy and Edward Markey of Massachusetts, both of them, they have introduced the Gay and Trans Panic Defense Prohibition Act. I think they need to figure out something a little bit better than that one. As try and come up with some kind of an acronym to make that a little easier to say. Evidently, and I'd never heard this before. Evidently, there are people who have killed people because someone of the same sex hit on them, or said something nice to them, or reached out to them in a certain way to say that they were interested in them. And the defense is not that, no, I killed them. Oh yeah, I killed them. But they were panicked. It's a gay panic defense. that didn't know what to do, so we just had to kill them. And I'm going, really? I don't get how that becomes. I don't get how you're that homophobic or that extreme. I just don't know how you get there. And there's part of me that goes, these people have been so pent up for so long that it's probably what they wanted anyway. You got to think that there was some signal there that they didn't want known, and that's probably the real reason. Interesting story coming out of South Carolina. This Mark Aderhold, I believe, former associate executive director and chief strategist for the South Carolina Baptist Convention. Yes, they have a chief strategist. God Incorporated needs a strategy. Evidently, about 20 years ago, he assaulted a teenager, and he is being indicted under charges of sexual assault of a child under the age of 17. It is a second-degree felony. Could carry 20 years in the big house. This is one of those things where you 21 years ago. I'm uncomfortable with the time frame, but not surprising in that community that you get people who are just trying to spread the word and other things. Just sad. And again, these are the religious people. And look, I grew up in the Catholic Church. The reality is all religions have them. And in every segment of the population, they're perverts and pedophiles. This is just another one. And hey, good for him. Hope he does well. Hope he does well in prison. Just mind blowing to me. But back to the education thing, and this is one of those moments where I'll be honest, I was surprised that the NEA actually took the aggressive stances that they took, especially because they don't really know how things are going to pan out. They've cut $50 million from their budget and their funding of programs and things and outreach that they had done in the past. Post Janus, to me, the interesting thing is going to be watch how the unions react. Will they pull back from the social justice stuff that they've been fighting for? Will they pull back from being on the right side of history and being only about what it is that they can bring in new members with? That's really what the right wants. They want labor to turn inward and only care about themselves and stop messaging and stop outreach and stop pushing for progressive values. They want to turn them into a corporation that only cares about themselves. And that's always been the message that they've thrown out. In fact, in the chat room, some idiot said that as well. Unions only care about themselves. No, that's not accurate at all. It's a nice talking point. Glad you can regurgitate it. Someone taught you how to speak. Nice job. But that's not the reality. The work that I've seen unions do over the years in pushing for progressive change and pushing for social justice, the fact that the Teamsters have an LGBTQ caucus speaks volumes to just how progressive unions are and how willing they are to move forward and to push for positive change. So good on them. And look, I'm glad to hear NEA is not going that route. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com, that's where you get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Remember, tune in Saturday, 7 p.m., Free Speech TV. Check your local listings. It's on Dish Network, DirecTV, and on cable providers across the country. Tune in afterwards for Overtime. Love to hear your thoughts. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where